Hi, this is Dan Miller, lead analyst and founder of Opus Research, and I'm here with Adrian.
I'm Adrian Kelly, Chief Product Officer from ValidSoft.
And we're here to talk about intelligent authentication. Just as a reminder, intelligent authentication is a term that Opus coined a couple years ago to try to capture the idea of consistent, simple, almost passive authentication of individuals as they move about in the real world and the digital world as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic. I think it's a topic whose time is now.
And the big question is why now? You know, because 2 years ago when we first started looking at it, we knew how things ought to go, and there were even government mandates that were saying, oh, if you're a bank, you need to have a layered approach with multi-factors and try to have strong authentication. And the emphasis was put on security. Mm-hmm. It seems when you're trying to encourage digital commerce, it's different. You want the security, but you have to add a convenience and a good customer experience with that. Is it easier now than it was to begin with?
I think so, and I think there's probably a few things I would say that are making now the right time. One is the scale challenge, because what we've realized is that the old models, which served a purpose to a point in time, just don't scale. As people's lives get more digital, we both know the stats, 50 passwords each, or probably even climbing now. There's a point past which that model just fails. So scale is one thing that's now very real. I think you've mentioned the user experience side of things, and I think people have realized that ultimately you're in the business of being in business. You need to make money. You need to satisfy your customer.
Right.
And there's lots of examples where there have been trend-leading user experience successes, like Apple was the one that everybody holds up, but also others. Uber I would hold up as another example.
Oh, interesting.
And then you end up having an expectation of the consumer of that simplicity. Mm-hmm. I think mobile is key, both in terms of what it means for inputting information from a security point of view, but also the context and information it can give you as part of your security model.
So that's exactly right. So this notion that you call it mobility, but it's really agility, because people are moving around in the physical world, but they're doing things in a digital realm at the same time. And part of intelligent authentication, part of behavior in that context is that it's important for a business to have confidence that the individual that was on a website or using the mobile app when they pick up the phone and call or something like that is the individual that you think they are.
Yes, and I think the other side of that's also true. The individual expects you to know that. Mm-hmm. We all have those experiences where you're interacting with a business and you're going, why don't they know me? Why are they asking me this question again? Mm-hmm. Why don't they take advantage of the information that they already have about me in a safe and secure way, but means that my experience is better? That's the winning experiences are the ones that you need to deliver, but on the business side, you must maintain the security as well. But we can do both now. That's the big shift. Now we can have better security and better user experience.
So Adrian, when the talk was of sort of multi-factor and layered, the question of where biometrics fits comes up.
Yep. So
biometrics, my personal observation is that biometrics is what makes things personal. Having constant authentication going on, meaning that there are engines out there that keep track of your location, keep track of your activity, pretty much have a level of confidence that you are who you are just based on what you're doing. It seems when a biometric is brought into play, it is to be that factor that is the most personal, is the one that makes services more personal.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, and that's one aspect to it. And don't forget, what that's about is it's always available. So a biometric, by definition, should always be available when it is the individual presenting themselves. I think that's one thing. It also speaks to scale. Because you've got a biometric means that you can use that biometric across multiple businesses, across multiple channels. And that's part of that scaling challenge we spoke about earlier. Mm-hmm. And that's another great benefit of biometrics. They scale, or they should scale, across different contexts without that cognitive load that you're putting on the user of all those different passwords.
And scale in this context is both just handling a lot of people, but handling a lot of instances where it's being summoned, and that's been pretty exciting to watch.
Yeah, and I think you've got to think about scale from both sides, from the business opportunity point of view, enabling all these different capabilities and transactions. But then as an individual, I want to be able to simply use my bank. I want to be able to simply interact with my government services. I want to be able to simply interact with my healthcare provider. And that's scale for the individual. And that's an incredibly exciting proposition to bring to bear as well.
Good point. And one of the things we've seen, and you brought this up, is that some of the value is just placed on people not having to remember passwords. So there's been a framing that intelligent authentication is one where I don't have to remember all sorts of things, but it strikes me that that's just the beginning.
And I think you're right, because I think it's also about, there's a piece around where the intelligence more comes in is the optimization. So from the business's point of view, they need to optimize the amount of effort they're putting into the authentication for the return it gives them. So one size doesn't fit all. And then on the side of the consumer, they've got to feel it's appropriate to the context that they're in and designing something that feels right in that context. And that's where I think a lot of the intelligence comes in. And part of how you achieve that is something you mentioned, which is there's a lot more information now available about people. You can supply a lot more context when you make those authentication decisions. So the intelligence is the thing that serves the need of the business, which is probably more focused towards security and enablement, and focused towards the consumer, which feels appropriate and simple, but sufficiently reassuring that they trust the transaction. And that's really where it gets complicated. You want just enough resistance for the consumer that they're assured that it's safe and can be trusted, but any more and you start to become an irritant.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well, because I think where we're going is user control of their digital lives. And that's using human intelligence, but not just to like remember a password, but to indicate by a number of means, by gesture, by location, what they want to do so that a business knows their intent in advance of them getting in touch.
And I think what's interesting about that is when you think about it from an authentication point of view is the extent to which we can and will have to provide the end user with the ability to control their own authentication context. Right. What authentication factors perhaps even I will allow a certain business to access and use, and there's almost that you almost move into that world of toward mutual authentication.
Yes.
I want you, Mr. Business, to use these factors to authenticate me, but you, different business, I might want to use different factors with you.
Right, and the mutual authentication is really a different word for trust. And we're talking about establishing a trusted mechanism for carrying out business, and the other aspect is that it must be seamless.
Yes, and I think in the omni-channel world we exist in today, that's one of the biggest challenges for practical reasons for a lot of big businesses. They'll have lines of business, they'll have existing structures, they'll have existing operating modes, existing budgets, and then trying to drive initiatives that work across all of that well-tuned business machinery can actually be a real challenge, but it's something we need to achieve to deliver on the promise of intelligent authentication.
Right, and is it fair to say that the scale issue is something that was overcome on behalf of businesses that are thinking about supporting something like intelligent authentication? But from the end user's point of view, it's really a convenience story. I mean, I can do more stuff. I don't think of that as scale. I think of that as, look at all the stuff I can do.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's more about convenience, but at least what it means is we are now presenting to the end user a security model that can scale for them.
Yeah.
Because too often this conversation in the past has been driven by the needs of the business. As you said earlier, it needs to be secure, which means I'm really putting a huge cognitive load on the end user. I think it is important to shape the conversation around the end user on the scale side to say, I'm giving the end user a model that they can scale as well as an individual. I think it's important we think of it that way. Yeah. Convenience is the real payoff, but to achieve that convenience, to make it meaningful, you've also got to think about scale, because that's where we went wrong in the past. We just moved more and more load on the user and thought, that'd be okay, they don't mind. Because don't forget, an individual business will design their model and think that works for me okay, but what they're not thinking about is this person is interacting with another 30 businesses with a similar model to me, each of which has the same level of cognitive load for that user, and that's where it falls down.
Right.
And that's where you end up with passwords on stickies on laptops.
Well, and also I think in a world of customer experience where we're trying to remove effort. Yes. Cognitive load equates to effort. Yes, absolutely. And the more you can do in the background, the more that you can only interrupt when it is to signal that, hey, this is a moment where we need to know a little bit more in order to provide you with confidence and me with confidence that this is safe.
Yes.
That's when it happens.
Yeah, and I think it feels almost magical when it's done well.
Yeah.
Because don't forget, it's the truth of what we do as an industry. We're kind of in the way. The consumer wants to achieve something, which is gain access to a service. A business wants to do something, which is to sell that service.
Right.
Our job is to make that work in a way where there's trust. But that's all we're supposed to do. So we're meant to do just enough to let that happen and then disappear. And if we get it right, it does feel like magic because both those parties get what they want.
There have been myths surrounding biometric authentication. And they're myths because they're falsehoods.
Yes.
But so when Opus first started looking at what we now call intelligent authentication, we were primarily looking at voice biometrics because we thought voice is really the most convenient biometric factor, given that you're usually on the phone with somebody in a contact center or you're using your mobile phone. And the myth there were two myths back then, and this will be ironic. One was that it would never be accurate enough. Mm-hmm. And that's probably true, because no single factor it can be accurate enough to satisfy the ultimate security person that says, I cannot afford a single false accept.
By the way, that's also true of passwords, but we can go back to that if you want.
Right, right. So, and I don't know whether this is part of the answer to the why now category or the dispelling or debunking a myth. There's no such thing as single factor authentication. There's always several factors taken into account at this point.
Yep.
And that's what's been very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think the other myths that I think about, one that's important to think about because it speaks to intelligent authentication and biometrics particularly is around what they represent is not a binary yes or no answer. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what the password model was based on. You type exactly these characters in the way that we agreed previously, and then that means whoever's typing it is that account, which in itself is a bit of a myth. What you get with multi-factor and with biometrics is an ability to make intelligent business decisions. So yes, you have false accepts, you also have false rejects, but what you can do is set the system up so you know exactly how you're going to perform on that scale. And that means as a system, as a business, you can control the level of risk you're opening yourself to potentially, but that's balanced by the amount of business you're enabling and the amount of profit you can generate. So you get a system that is genuinely controllable and controllable by you, the business. So you end up with a much better, a much more controlled environment.
And there's a flip side to that because it is also under the user control. It's under the customer's control as well. Yes. So it's that mutual satisfaction.
And I think for long-term success, you need to have that sense that there's a level of parity in the relationship. Yeah. Both parties are bringing something to the party, and both parties can control and influence it. That way you can build long-term business relationships.
Yeah. The definition of intelligent authentication will evolve and has been evolving as there's more options out there. And I think what we're finding is that a certain amount of the intelligence is being applied to what level of security you want for any particular instance. And that's been fascinating to watch. You'll see things like people looking at their bank balance on the lock screen of their phone, which was unheard of when the banks first introduced this. But people kind of said, well, I'd kind of like to know my bank balance without providing all kinds of stuff. So that's by mutual consent as well, that I don't need a lot of security attached to something that's like an inquiry. Yes. But if from that same phone, I all of a sudden wanted to transfer a few grand over to some account in, Eastern Europe or something, that it would be different. I would be interrupted for some reason by magic. Yes,
absolutely. And I think you're right. I think that's one of the challenges that as this evolves, where does it go? Candidly, none of us know. But I think some of the things you can realize is data will be important. Mm-hmm. And therefore you think about the work that's gone on in machine learning and where that may take us. And you think about as things are more digital, I think how we define authentication and what contributes to authentication will shift over time. And I think it will increasingly be data driven. And part of that will be because businesses can then apply more and more control and have more refine what they do. And there'll be much more thoughtful application of that passive versus active paradigm as well. And you'll see that being very carefully monitored. Thanks, Dan.
It was a lot of fun.